What if genetic engineering could be used to eliminate malaria once and for all?
Welcome to Plain English, the podcast that goes at the right speed for English language learners. Listen now and read the transcript online at plainenglish.com. Now, here's Jeff, your host for today's episode.
Scientists are getting close to finalizing a technique called gene drive that could eliminate the species of mosquito that carries malaria. If put into place, it could help save the 500,000 people, most of whom are children, who die of malaria every year. But there might be some downsides. Hi everyone, this is Jeff, and welcome to Plain English, episode number 91 for Thursday, October 4th, 2018. I'm back in the United States and had a really nice time in Mexico last week. JR and I had the pleasure of meeting a few listeners for coffee and snacks in Polanco, a neighborhood in Mexico City. We met with Ileana, Guadalupe, Mario, and Mario's mom. We were able to chat for a couple of hours. We talked about learning English in Mexico, learning Spanish in the United States, like I'm doing. Mario's also learning French. And we talked about our travels and some differences between Mexican and American culture. It was a great time, and big thanks to JR for organizing everything. Today's episode transcript can be found at plainenglish.com/91, plainenglish.com/91, where you'll find translations of keywords and phrases into Spanish, Portuguese, Japanese, Italian, Chinese, and French. And to get the episode summaries with additional vocabulary words and links to English articles, just head to plainenglish.com/mail and sign up there. Malaria kills about 500,000 people per year, mostly in Africa, and scientists might have found a way to completely kill off the mosquitoes that transmit this deadly disease. The technology is called gene drive, and it's a form of genetic engineering. In genetic engineering, scientists alter an organism's genetic composition, hoping to produce or eliminate specific traits in future generations. Genetic engineering has been around for years and is mostly used to make food more resilient. For example, to make tomatoes grow bigger and last longer, or for salmon to get bigger. But in a technique called gene drive, scientists think they have discovered a way to completely eliminate a species of mosquito. They would do this by adversely affecting the way new mosquitoes develop. When this gene modification is introduced into the population, baby mosquitoes would not develop into either male or female, but would actually have physical characteristics of both. And a mosquito that develops in this way can neither lay eggs, meaning it cannot reproduce, nor bite, meaning it can't infect humans. In a laboratory setting, researchers were able to completely eliminate a population of mosquitoes in just 11 generations, which is fairly quick for mosquitoes. As far back as the 1960s, biologists conceptually outlined how they thought such mosquitoes could be eliminated, but it is only now becoming practical to do so. The actual human effects of malaria are tough to estimate, but in 2015, the disease is believed to have killed between 400,000 and 700,000 people, the vast majority of whom were under 5 years old. 90% were in sub-Saharan Africa. Hundreds of millions of people, actually about 3% of the world's population, suffers from malaria each year, and though most of them recover, they can suffer fever, chills, muscle pains, and a general feeling of sickness to the stomach. Occasionally, the symptoms are worse than that. Malaria was once a big problem all around the world. It was common in France, the United States, and other developed countries. The U.S. eliminated malaria in the late 1940s and early 1950s with a national initiative that included draining mosquito breeding grounds, spraying houses with chemical insecticides, and often spraying from airplanes. Today, though, the disease is still common in Africa and Asia. It's definitely a good thing that we don't have malaria here in the U.S., but I'm not sure that, given what we now know, spraying huge parts of the world from airplanes is a good idea either. Gene drives, however, present the opportunity to eliminate malaria without having to spray chemicals all over the place. The story, though, is not quite that simple. It comes, as does so much these days with new technology, with an ethical dilemma. Do we really want to scientifically eliminate a species? How should that be done? And what might be the future consequence of employing this technology? Let's start with the first question. Do we want to scientifically eliminate a species? It's one thing to do it in the laboratory, but it is quite another to do it in the wild. Would this gene drive affect other species of mosquitoes, potentially leading to a much bigger chain reaction than what was intended? Though mosquitoes are bad for humans, they are part of a complex food chain. What organisms farther up the food chain might be affected, and how will a whole ecosystem potentially change from losing just one small member? These are things that are difficult, if not impossible, to plan for. Secondly, even if we can all agree that genetically modifying this mosquito is a good idea, you can certainly imagine that this type of technology might be used recklessly in the future by scientists who are either not careful or worse. And national borders are just lines on the map. They don't apply to ecosystems. The world doesn't yet have a way to govern the use of these tools. So, who controls what gene drives will be put into place? These are tough questions, but they also have to be set against the real possibility of improving human lives. Scientists acknowledge the general worries about the potential abuse of gene drives, but they also believe that gene drives are a slow and methodical tool and can easily be reversed. It is right to be cautious when thinking about making changes to our ecosystem, but it is also possible to be too cautious. If 500,000 people, the population of a medium-sized city, die every year, then there is a real human cost to delaying and contemplating the potential downsides. More than 1,000 people die of this disease every day. It seems right now, at least to me, that the world is treating this right. The scientists making the discoveries are being careful about the implications of their work and are working with the populations and the countries that are being affected. They are also working quickly to advance the new techniques so they can be used as soon as they are ready to be safely used. A couple listeners wrote to me this week, and I wanted to make sure to say hi to them. Clinta from Latvia wrote, and she said she was positive that she was the only plain English listener in her country. So I went back into the stats and found that she's not the only listener. It's not possible to say how many people listen in a country exactly, but you can see how many downloads the program gets over time. And there are a couple hundred downloads from tiny Latvia. So Clinta, you have company out there in your country, but please continue to spread the word for us over there. Nick from Italy just started listening to podcasts and listens to business and photography podcasts as well as to plain English, which is great. In fact, that's one of the things we talked about in Mexico, the fact that even though you're learning, you don't want to just listen to a textbook in your ears. You want to be listening to something interesting. So I'm glad to hear Nick and so many others of you are listening to things of general interest to you. It makes English a little more fun, I think. Today I'm going to share with you two little words that I know I've used before, and they're not hard to understand, but I want you to get a little more practice with them. Those words are upside and downside. They are each just one word, upside one word, downside one word, and they are used to describe the positive and negative aspects of a decision. So let's think about the question about gene drives. What's the upside? The upside is if we can eliminate the malaria mosquito, we could potentially save hundreds of thousands of kids each year. But there's a downside too, right? And that is that we don't quite know how this will work in the wild. And the world's governments have not yet formulated a way to regulate and control the use of gene drives. Decisions are tough when either the upside or the downside is concrete and measurable. It's real. But the other side is kind of nebulous and hard to grasp, hard to measure. I think that's the case here. We can measure and really perceive the upside to eliminating malaria, but the downside is a little harder to grasp. Remember one time last week on Monday, we talked about Facebook and social media companies who have to block or disconnect certain users. What were some of the upsides and downsides of those decisions? When Facebook decides to block a user, the upside is that the user will no longer be spreading violent or hateful content online. But isn't there a downside too? Does Facebook really want to be deciding post by post what content is allowed? Unfortunately, they have to accept that downside just because of how big they are and how their technology is being used. If you want to hear more about that, you can listen to the full episode at plainenglish.com/90. Has someone ever presented you with a proposal and it seems too good to be true? You might ask, what's the downside? I just rented an apartment for the weekend in Mexico, and it reminded me that searching for a place to stay is all about weighing the upside and the downside. The upside might be a great location, good design, comfortable space, but the downside might be the price. Or one place might be cheaper and still in a good location, but the downside might be that there's noise from the street or not much privacy. I'm a very analytical person by nature, so I'm constantly thinking about the upside and the downside of every decision. Sometimes I just need to let that go and decide, but it's hard for me. All right, that's all for today's episode. Thanks for putting up with my voice today. I'm a little under the weather, not feeling very good, but I'll be back on Monday, hopefully at full strength. Thanks for joining us once again. Thanks again to the listeners who came out to say hello. Ileana, Guadalupe, and Mario. And Mario's mom was a good sport, putting up with all this talk about podcasts for a few hours. I put a picture of us on the website at the bottom of this episode transcript at plainenglish.com/91. And I do want to say hello to one more person. She's not a listener, but her name is Laura, and she works in downtown Mexico City. I found myself in a bit of a tough situation, and Laura helped me out in a big way when I needed it on my travels. So muchas gracias and un abrazo for Laura in Mexico City. That's all for today. Next up on Monday, we'll talk about London's new take on the old phone booth. And boy, are there some downsides to that idea. You'll learn about that on Monday. Hope to see you then.